Okay, so this is the third lecture in the developmental psychology module, and this lecture is going to discuss aging and aging processes, both cognitive ones as well as social ones. Um, Aging is an important topic to study. I mean, the first reason is that we all are going to age. It is inevitable. It's an inevitable part of life is that we grow older. But it's also the case that around the world and in the US specifically, the number of older adults is increasing. And so I think the NOBA module cited that by the year 2030, the number of older adults classified as 65 or older in the US is going to be twice the number than that of 2010. So there is, people are just living longer. There's better health care, there's better nutrition, all kinds of reasons. So um, each successive generation can just expect to live longer than their grandparents did. And there's a lot of implications for understanding aging. There's questions as we all consider aging and growing older. There's just important questions to consider, knowing that we could live to be 80 or 90 or even 100 years old, right? So questions like, well, when should I settle down and start a family? Many decades ago, people kind of needed to consider starting families earlier because they just didn't live as long. Um, but maybe you can sit now we say, well, maybe I can wait. And indeed, many people are choosing to wait longer to settle down, get married, and start a family. Um, when will I be able to retire? Um, many people are even now facing having to work much later into life to be able to save enough for their retirement, forecasting that they know that they're going to live a longer time. And that knowing that we are going to live a longer time, what can we expect? What can we expect related to our cognitive and mental ability? And what can we expect regarding our social relationships? What can we expect regarding our overall levels of happiness? So, this lecture will just touch on some of those topics and just to introduce them to you. So, after hearing this lecture, I hope that you'll be able to explain research approaches to studying aging, be able to describe some of the cognitive, psychosocial, and physical changes that occur with age, and then provide some examples of how age related changes in these domains are observed in the context of everyday life. So, I'll go over how psychologists study aging, I'll review cognitive aging. Um, it's not great news, I have to be honest, that we experience many cognitive declines as we age. Some things we get better at, but several declines. I'll review personality and self related processes. That is, does our personality change? Does how we come to think about ourselves change as we age? How relationships change as we age? Emotions, well being, and happiness among older folks, and then just generally thinking about longevity. So, first, when it comes to studying aging, there's the important recognition that there's substantial differences between older people, and this is the concept of heterogeneity. Heterogeneity just means differences. And so it's been observed that, as people age, there's quite a bit of differences both within and among people, and that reflects both biological and genetic factors as well as the history that people have lived. And so there's two broad theories to understand how people age. The first one are life course theories. And so um, this theory highlights the effects of social expectations of age-related life events and social roles. Um, so it really considers um, that as we age, there are certain things that are expected of us at certain times in our life, and that there are roles that we play and kind of a normative that is typical or usual timing to events. So, for instance, as we age, there are things that are normative, that is typical of being a college age student. And then there are things that are typical of being middle aged. So, for instance, many middle aged people are parents, but not all are. Many middle aged people have kind of full time employment. Not everybody does, but these would be things that would certainly be differences from middle age to, say, college age. And then as we move on past middle age into the older years, there's other kind of um, things that are typical, like typically people retire, they don't work all the time. So, as a way to understand aging, these life course theories say is a way to understand the aging process and how people change that needs to be understood within understanding kind of what is typical of most or many people's life trajectories. Um, these life course theories also try to understand the lifelong effects of being members in specific cohorts of people, which are known as generations. And different generations have been exposed to different historical events. So, for instance, there's, in the United States, there's the generation that's known as the greatest generation. These are the generation of folks that fought in our world wars. And after that, there was the baby boomers. These were all the people that were born to people that came back after World War II, so kind of in the mid 40s and early 50s. Um, I'm a member of Generation X, so basically born in the late 70s and early 80s. And so there's been certain historical developments that have happened to those generations, and that influences how we've aged, our outlook on life, our outlook on things. Um, it's quite likely the case that this generation that is growing up right now is going to be known as living through the coronavirus pandemic, and that's something that is quite likely to influence um, their outlook on life. So if you think about children that are growing up and being socialized right now in the early formative years around the dangers of a virus, not being able to do certain social activities, that's going to influence their outlook on life as they age, and that's something that they will carry with them through the aging process. Okay, so those are all examples of just things that a life course theory would consider as people age. Um, that is somewhat in contrast to lifespan theories, which are more concerned with what happens within people as they age. And so I think about this mostly as um, looking at different biological factors of being interested in what happens to our brain as we age. So that's one way to kind of distinguish those theories. In terms of research methods, both life course and lifespan researchers generally rely on um, longitudinal studies, which is to collect multiple measurements from people over a period of time. But occasionally they'll use cross-sectional studies as well. And so this is a slice in time, and say looking at a particular slice in time, like in the year 2020, as a for example, looking at different generations of people or different age group people, and then looking at differences in, say, cognitive abilities and um, values and personalities and things like that. So longitudinal studies will look more within a person and look at changes in a person across their lifetime, which indeed requires um, having somebody participate in a study for multiple years and collecting measurements from them over all of those years, versus cross-sectional is a study that you can do in one time. It's just a slice of time, but you look at people from different age groups in that slice of time. All right, so cognitive aging. Um, so many of our cognitive abilities decrease, but not all. So here's what decreases. Our fluid intelligence decreases. So, fluid intelligence refers to our information processing abilities, such as logical reasoning, remembering things, our reaction time. That decreases. Our recall of information decreases, which is our ability to remember details without the help of like a list or some other kind of memory device. Our working memory also decreases. Working memory generally refers to our ability to simultaneously store and use information. So if we think about being told something like a set of driving directions or the address of a building or even a telephone number before you can like scurry to get it in your phone, if you just have to hold on to that, that's generally we're holding that information in our mind and we're able to work or manipulate the information. That's our working memory. Unfortunately, that is reduced as we age. Processing speed refers to the speed of kind of our general cognitive performance. Um, that is reduced, and hearing and vision decrease with age as well. So there is some good news. Our crystallized intelligence, which is commonly referred to as wisdom, is our ability to draw upon experience and knowledge. Because older people have simply accumulated more life experience, they have more um, experience and knowledge to draw on. So there's actually increases in crystallized intelligence. And this can involve things like even things that you would think of like traditional kind of academic tests. So measures of vocabulary, as one example. Uh, um, More experience, more exposure to words and vocabulary. Even things like solving number problems, being able to read a passage of text and understand that passage of text because of um, having greater understanding about the world. So um, generally being able to do things and draw from experience increases, and that's the wisdom that is often called crystallized intelligence. Um, Older adults also have greater cognitive efficiency. This just refers to a better grasp of probable outcomes. So, as one example, chess experts that are older are able to focus on a smaller set of possible moves than younger chess players that are more novice. They just have the experience of all those games played, and they're more likely to say, the likely outcome if I move this piece is this, so it's going to be a good move or a bad move. Um, so just having a better sense of what is likely versus unlikely when doing things more generally. Um, and then the greater ability to solve interpersonal and emotional problems. So this comes with the life experience and the wisdom of having had um, difficult times in life or having had relationships and having kind of a database of all of those experiences and being able to refer back to being able to successfully um, cope with difficulty, to being able to solve one's problems, to be able to deal with sadness, to be able to deal with anger, to kind of refer back and say, well, here's what I did the last, when I've been upset before, and this is what worked. So with experience comes a greater ability to be more skilled at relationships, as well as more skilled at emotional regulation. Okay, generally speaking, um, not everybody is, but generally speaking. And then in terms of cognitive ability that stays about the same is recognition. And so this just refers to your ability to remember information with the assistance of cues. So you could think of a multiple choice test as one example of a recognition based cognitive ability test. So anything in which there's any kind of cues or aids that assist with ability to remember um, cognitive ability stays about the same as we age. All right. What about personality and self-related processes? So you might ask, does your personality change as we age? Well, it does. Personality does remain stable for some, but for others, personality can change quite a bit. Um, it was previously thought personality doesn't change much at all after our early adulthood. So our personality is actually evolving quite a bit from the time that we're in our teens up into like our early 20s. It was originally thought that at our early 20s, our personality kind of was what it was, is, you know, that who you are as a person, or who you would describe yourself to be as a person in terms of personality, didn't change much um, after early adulthood. What psychologists have come to find out is, while it's true that some people's personalities do remain very stable, others do change. Okay, and that just has to do with life events that happen. Um, Interestingly, though, on average, older adults do demonstrate less neuroticism, which is a the tendency to experience negative emotion, such as being moody, anxious, not handling stress well. So over time, we become less neurotic. However, there's also less openness to experience. So things like intellectual curiosity, being imaginative, preference for variety, that is something that on average changes over time. So in general, again, this doesn't refer to everybody, but on average, typically as we age, our personality changes and that we become less open to experience. Conscientiousness, however, increases. And so if you think about what being conscientious means, it means being careful, responsible, organized. Okay, we generally become more conscientious in our older age. Okay, so again, some people are very stable, but it really, where we see variation is that there's very specific things that happens to people. Going through a significant illness and making it through on the other side, going through a divorce, going through the the loss of somebody special. That could be a child, it could be a partner. These are things that can change personality. Um, so, all right. Now, what definitely changes is the way that people describe themselves, and much of what we value depends on the stage of life that we're in. And so, um, studying this effect, psychologists have studied this effect through the use of autobiographical narratives. These are basically the stories that we tell about ourselves that differentiate us from other people. So as we age, we generally tend to worry about the things that we worry about as we age are different from the time that we're young adults to middle-aged adults. Um, Young adults are concerned with finishing school, maybe finding a romantic partner, kind of figuring out who they are. In middle age, typically people are less concerned with those things because maybe they've found a partner, they've decided on their career, and so they care more about starting a family and maybe being a good parent or a provider. And then later in adulthood is more kind of characterized by looking back on one's life and reflecting about living a good life, um, and sometimes having to cope with the challenges of losing a spouse. So the way that we describe who we are in our autobiographical narratives changes a lot based on that time period in our life. So if you think about how you would describe yourself, a lot of how you describe yourself is going to be based on where your current values are. And a lot of that might have to do with the current social relationships that you're in. Um, could it be about, fulfilling one's obligations as a son or a daughter? It could be about finishing school. It could be about finding a career. So those stories that you tell about yourself to others and describing who you are and your identity um, become very different as we age. Um, for some of those reasons. Okay. And then finally, there's the idea of subjective age, which is the idea that how old or young a person um, feels is not necessarily the same as their chronological age. Okay, so um, somebody that can be 40 years old but say, "Yeah, but I feel young. I feel like a 20-year-old." So subjective age just refers to how old a person feels versus their chronological age and kind of the group that they place themselves in. Um, so in early adulthood, most people say that they feel a bit younger than their chronological age. But interestingly, that gap kind of increases. So by the time that people are 40 years old, they end up saying, typically, they say that they're, "Oh, I feel like I'm in my 30s." So the kind of the older one gets, the bigger that gap between chronological age and subjective age. What's important um, is feeling young is a good thing, but also being satisfied with one's age and aging process. So having a positive self-perception of how one is aging. Um, it's important because people who are able to accept the changes that happen with aging, like the changes in appearance, the change in physical ability, which happens, right? There's just declines in appearance, there's declines in physical ability, and being able to accept and adapt that is associated with um, better well-being and better health and longevity. All right, so relationships. Over the course of our lives, we have all kinds of relationships, certainly with family members, with friends, with people that are our mentors and our supervisors. And so we rely on people for all kinds of things, for information, for help, for support, for love, for comfort. And so as we have relationships, we've got family members, we've got friends, we've got coworkers, we have the opportunity to gain relationships and lose relationships. And so one question is, what do people prioritize that motivates them to form relationships and to end relationships? And does this motivation change as people age? And so there's a couple different theories or models for understanding how we approach relationships as we age. So the first is the convoy model of social relations. Basically, what this suggests is that the frequency types and reciprocity of social exchanges change with age. Um, and that these social exchanges impact the health and well being of the givers and the receivers. So, uh, basically, what this model says is um, what we exchange with other people, how often we exchange, and whether we expect there to be reciprocity in the exchange changes with age. One specific example that would be explained by the convoy model would be that as you age and become a parent, parents don't often expect reciprocity in what they give to their children. So if they're giving guidance, support, nurturance, information, the expectation for reciprocity is not the same. However, when we're starting out and we're in our young adult years and we're forming friendships, there can be different expectations about reciprocity. And indeed, the basis for many strong friendships and relationships is kind of this equal exchange of whatever it is that you're exchanging. And so if that's sharing one's time, sharing one's help, sharing one's affection, the expectation is that there's a reciprocation of those things that are exchanged. Okay, so kind of a complementary model to the convoy model is a socio-emotional selectivity theory. And what this this was originally proposed to explain the finding that as we age, there tends to be a reduction of social partners. We just have it's generally found that older people have smaller friendship networks. And so, why might that be the case? Um, and this is explained in that older adults are more focused on meeting their emotional needs than their information gathering goals. So, as we're younger, one reason that we form relationships with others is that we're trying to get information about the world. Part of that is to get information about who we are and how we see ourselves. And so, we often have a broader network. We belong to more things, more groups, more clubs, more organizations. Um, and this is a way to gather information about the world and ourselves. As we kind of figure out who we are as people, our goals change, and it becomes more, at least according to the theory, we become more focused on closer, intimate relationships to have our emotional needs met. So the idea is that we are more selective in choosing social partners who fit this need. Um, and the idea is that what we're trying to do is ultimately optimize our experience of positive emotion and positive affect. And so we very actively restrict, as we age, our social life to prioritize time with emotionally close and significant others. Um, and so, kind of in line with this, again, research shows that older adults have smaller networks compared to young adults who have much larger networks. Older adults also tend to avoid negative interactions with others. Um, so, again, the idea is that as we age, it becomes more important to have a smaller number of significant others that we can get emotional support from, and generally where we're provided with positive emotion and affect. Um, Kind of a similar selective process can be observed among young adults when there's this kind of time horizon for an interaction with other people that is limited. So, for instance, graduating high school might be something that is salient in people's mind, or you know, in the not so distant past. So, the idea that we would, when we're kind of coming to the end of an experience with people, we're going to gravitate towards a smaller number of people that we really want to share that experience with, as a way to kind of get the most out of it. So, the socio-emotional selectivity theory says that we just tend to do that more in life as we age. Um, and kind of the one way of thinking about it is we just tend to have less time for negative people that bring us down. Okay, what about marriage? Uh, so, is being married a good thing? Well, generally speaking, yes, it is. Um, Research would support that older married people who receive positive social and emotional support from their partner generally report better health, physical as well as mental health, than their unmarried peers. That is, people that were widowed, people that were divorced, or people that were single. Okay. However, so long as the marriage is a positive one, where there is, generally speaking, mutual um, support, love, respect, etc., even in equal division of labor, like around the house. So there's less positive aspects if one partner is the primary caregiver. So, for instance, um, because women generally have a longer lifespan and longevity uh, than men, in those couples where you've got a husband wife, where the husband um, starts to have declining health, and uh, the wife needs to end up playing kind of a caregiver role in later years, that can they're often report less life satisfaction in those circumstances, as one example. Okay, um, so when it comes to emotion and well-being, it's important to think about the psychological well-being of older adults. Now, we might stereotypically think of older adults as being kind of sad and alone, and indeed, they often lose loved ones along the way. Um, at one point or another, they're often a widow or a widower. Um, they often, can be geographically separated from other family members. So you might think that these experiences result in much less psychological well-being among um, older people. There's two ways to think about psychological well-being. The first one is a sense of uh, kind of overall, like, living a good life. Okay, and so this is known as global subjective well-being, and this is just an kind of a person's overall perception of his or her life as being generally good or generally bad. And so, as a person ages, their health, whether or not they have a family, whether or not they have sources of support, as well as their life experiences, all go into influence this global subjective sense of well-being. Um, so, um, various serious life events, for example, like unemployment or poor health, can have a very negative impact on well-being as people age. Interestingly, though, research finds that reports of global subjective well being are the highest in early and later adulthood, but lowest in midlife. So older adults, despite all the things that can happen, and despite many of our stereotypes and characterizations of poor old lonely people, um, older people tend to report a higher sense of global subjective well-being than people in their midlife. And a lot of that could be due to kind of a looking backwards and reflecting on one's life and looking at all the good that was associated with it. Right? So being a parent, being a grandparent, accomplishing a lot in one's career. So that could be the thing that explains it. Well, what about hedonic well-being? So hedonic well-being is a slightly different view on happiness, and so this refers more to the emotional component of well-being, and it measures the extent to which people feel positive versus negative affect. So really, the extent to which people feel happiness, pleasure, just feeling good versus feeling negative, sad, stressed, etc. So that all goes into an evaluation of hedonic well-being, which is just what we more typically think of as is feeling happy and not feeling sad. Very interestingly here, the pattern of positive affect and hedonic well-being across the adult lifespan is similar to that of global subjective well-being, with experiences of positive emotions such as happiness and enjoyment being the highest in young adulthood as well as older adulthood. And interestingly, experiences of negative affect, and particularly stress and anger, tend to decrease with age. Um, and experiences of sadness are also lowest in the early adulthood as well as later adulthood compared to midlife. So the pattern is that it's actually people that are kind of in midlife that report lower levels of global subjective well-being as well as hedonic well-being. And I think midlife can be a particularly stressful time for a lot of people. There's kind of wrangling the competing demands of career and family and expectation, the pressure to support for a family, and then the difficulty of unemployment. It can be difficult to, and this is something that is happening right now, is that the lack of life certainty that is accompanied with gainful employment um, can can really be devastating for people's psychological well-being. So in early adulthood, there's perhaps less worry about that because in early adulthood, many people are still dependent on or supported by their parents. Not all, but many. Again, we're talking about averages. This doesn't apply to everybody, but on average. Okay. And then later in life, uh, people have kind of made it through, and they're often retired, and they're living on a pension or living on Social Security, or that's kind of behind them. So it's this period of middle age that can really be quite stressful for folks, and that can result in more negative emotion and kind of a lower assessment of psychological well-being. All right, so finally, when it comes to longevity, we can say that there's two main influences that account for how old people are and kind of how um, healthy they are as they age, which is what we're talking about with longevity. So first is, of course, genes. And research shows that genes from twin studies account for about 25% of the reason why some people live longer than others. So that's 25%. Well, the rest then needs to be environment. So quite a bit of how successfully we age and how old we get to be is environment. And so part of being able to age successfully has to do with we can say low risk factors. So being able to avoid disease, being able to avoid high blood pressure. So avoiding smoking, avoiding drugs, avoiding alcohol, avoiding getting obese by eating a healthy diet. So that's absolutely stuff that is environmentally determined, and that's part of longevity. Another key to successful aging and longevity is just to maintain physical and cognitive functioning, and that can be through both physical exercise as well as mental exercise. I know that my own parents try to do these things, which I encourage them to do. So, playing crossword puzzles, doing number puzzles like Sudoku and things like this are a great way to continue to use the brain, not to stagnate and just sit in front of a TV all the time, but to get out, to interact, to use one's brain. And then finally, just mentioning getting out, active engagement in social and productive activities that helps keep people active and engaged through their life is a key to successful aging. Okay, well, that's it when it comes to aging. Hopefully, that gives you some perspective or at least some idea of some of the things to expect in the coming years. It might be pretty far down the road, but that's a look ahead. And if it's a ways down the road for you, hopefully, it gives you a better appreciation of some of the older folks in your life, whether that's parents or grandparents or whoever that is. So, hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.